Welcome to this session of the Cyber Leaders Exchange. My guests today are Christine Halverson, the Public Sector Chief Technology Officer at Okta, and Jim Smid, the DoD and Intel Field CTO for Palo Alto Networks. Christine, let me start with you. Identity is well known to be the foundational pillar of Zero Trust. I did an interview just recently with someone over at the Marine Corps, and they were all about identity. That's what they were working on each of the 7 pillars across DoD, but identity. What are some of the trends you're seeing? What are some of the things around identity management, access management, and Zero Trust that you're seeing among your clients and customers in the federal sector?
Yeah, and Jason, it's funny you say that because at Okta, all it is identity, right? Because that's all we do, right? We work with our partners like Palo Alto who help us, go across the stacks of the 5 pillars of Zero Trust. But really, what we're seeing, right, is this massive shift to multi-cloud environments really has left the cybersecurity team scrambling, and there is no easy button for Zero Trust. Right? I can't just go to Staples and find that easy button and hit it, and all of a sudden Zero Trust is implemented. And so with that, you have to have kind of your technical stack that is integrating together and that is neutral and flexible. And that is why we work with people like Palo Alto, right, as a really significant partner in order to cut across the stacks when we're talking about the different pillars. Because what you have between the pillars of Zero Trust, when you're talking about it, yes, Okta sits in identity, but we also have capabilities that go through the stacks, again, working with our partners through the integration network that we have, because we realize that there's threat signals that happen in each one of those stacks. And what we're seeing is that those threat signals that are happening there have to be shared and consolidated together to take actions. And that's where we're seeing Zero Trust move as people are maturing their Zero Trust journey. And so that's what we're starting to see, because the actors are actually operating in between the stacks right now, and that's where the vulnerabilities are sitting. So again, working on their shared signals, which we can talk about more here in a little bit, is really where we see it going, especially with identity being, as you mentioned, the front door into the Zero Trust journey.
That's perfect, Christine. I'll just add on to that. The partnership I think is so important. A lot of what we talk about with my role is with the DoD leadership. And there's 3 things they always ask. They want to consolidate the security stack that they're working with. They want really tightly integrated tools, and they need to start kind of accelerating this journey. We're about almost 2 years now into where they put out the Zero Trust strategy. And you really hit the nail on the head. A lot of this, I always talk about Zero Trust as an ecosystem. It's not a single set of products. That integration piece, I think, is really, really critical. You talk about being able to stitch those different threat levels together and actors that are working kind of in between the lines there. The partnership, the things we do with Okta, very tight integrations out of the box. That's what simplifies and allows you to accelerate this Zero Trust journey. You have tools that work really, really well together. And it's such a more complicated environment than we've dealt with in the past. We have almost all of our customers are utilizing multi-cloud environments. They have applications, data residing in all kinds of different places. We've shifted kind of what that paradigm looked like, and having tools that can integrate together and be effective across all of that landscape is really, really critical for our customers. And what the Zero Trust team at the DoD is asking for is come with that consolidated, integrated approach. And that's what we're trying to do with our partners.
Yeah, and to just add on to what Jim's saying, being a former government employee for over 20 years who actually did digital transformation projects and had the technical debt and had the technical stack and works with, right, our DoD customers now. I think what's really important to note about what Jim said is that integration by the companies is very important in that environment, because if you're not doing that in your technical stack, that means now in the government, I would have to write custom code. I would have to O&M that custom code, right? So once I start introducing custom code in, I have more security vulnerabilities now. I have a larger O&M cost, right, with a tail on it that I have to worry about every single year. And it's another thing I have to worry about in my cybersecurity resiliency plan. Versus if companies are integrating directly together, they're actually putting that extra layer of security on that piece together. And you have 2 companies who are watching that integration every single day. and putting lots of time and money and resources towards the cybersecurity of that integration. And it's built in. So it's just something to point out of why that integration is so important and why it's important in a way that it's not just one platform doing it, where you can have that resiliency built in as well.
Jim, I want to go back to something you said about the environment being maybe a little bit more challenging or complex. I thought the cloud was supposed to make it less complex. I thought by moving to the cloud, everything was supposed to get easier, is maybe not the right word, but hey, when it was in your data center, oh, that was such a heavy lift. It was so much to worry about. Now, I thought my life as an IT administrator is supposed to be better, faster, and cheaper.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because I think I think there is some thought out there that when things began moving to the cloud, that we would shift that security problem to the cloud providers as well. And it's really that's not the case. While it may have made some things from an infrastructure perspective a little bit easier, from a cybersecurity perspective, and I have things all over the place, and I have to be consistent on how I'm going to secure them. I need to be responsible for, it's still my data, it's still my applications, it's still my users coming in. I'm the one that's watching that, not the cloud providers. So while it may have simplified a few things, it is overcomplicated a lot of other things, and cybersecurity, I think, is on the receiving end of that. It's not surprising, I think, to see the increase in attacks that are going towards where these applications and data are residing in the cloud, because that's kind of the honeypot at this point, right? They know the data and the applications are there, so there's a lot more of those attacks are being focused in that one area, and I think the biggest problem that we're running into is I always talk about it from three perspectives. One is just the speed of the attacks are coming so much faster. The sophistication that goes hand in hand with the speed. You're using AI, things like that against us. They're using bots, and the sheer scale of what's coming in and what's coming at us. We used to see. I've been doing cybersecurity long enough. I remember when it was unique that we would get a 0-day attack, and it was something you would talk about. And now across the board, we see 1.7 million 0-day attacks, which just means an attack that you've never seen before. That happens every single day. And that number is mind-boggling. If you're not using very sophisticated tools and be able to tie those threat vectors, as Christine talked about earlier, together, you're going to miss those kind of new attacks. And they're coming at us directly at the cloud, not just at our on-prem environment.
That 1.7 million 0-day attacks, just to be clear, Jim, you were saying that's every day we're seeing new ones?
Every day on average, we're seeing 1.7 0-day attacks, 1.7 million. That's a mind-boggling number, right?
That is. I'm a little bit shocked by it. I mean, and there's a lot out there, but at the same time, it kind of brings you back around to a whole different set of topics about secure by design and some of the things that you're seeing CISA do. But let's
Sure.
maybe not go down that path quite yet. I
Absolutely.
do want to go back to something as well you said about the looking at the data, the apps, because that's where they reside in the cloud. And this is why that front end, that front door piece is so important. And Christina, this is where Okta comes in, of course, is identity. That's usually the front door. Hey, how do I log into my computer? What's my two-factor authentication? From a identity standpoint, are there certain risks that are starting to get, people starting to understand more, or they're starting to get surprised by? I know you mentioned the shared threat signals. I think we'll go there next, but give me a sense of the identity piece, about the risks and the pillars, and how this is why so many people focus on identity first.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you have to understand kind of the life cycle of identity, right? When we're talking about it, there's really 5 key pieces to it, right? You have the authentication piece. And actually there's probably 6, because what we're seeing now coming out is the identity proofing on the front end before the authentication or the user even logs in, right? So there's a whole identity proofing movement going on right now, which is really proving who you are, right? And then you have the authorization piece once you're authenticated of what should you have authorization to, right? And we're really seeing in the authorization space, right, the move from kind of to more attribute-based authorization of things about you, right? So authentication is, am I who I am, right? Am I the person I am? Am I coming in from the areas? And then that authorization piece is, do I match what I should match and who I am, who I say I am? So for example, if I should be logging on from Virginia, but all of a sudden I'm logging on from, Russia, does it look strange, right? Should I be logging on from Russia? Did I put a travel, notification in? Is that where I should be? So that's the piece on authorization. And should I have access to the things that I have access to? And then there's the overall administration of all that, which Jim kind of hit on how difficult that's becoming. And then obviously the auditing, right, for compliance and governance, and then kind of analytics, right, to be able to spot areas of what you need to do. And all of that needs to be automated, right? There's pieces of that have to be automated to keep up with the threats, as Jim just talked about, because the threats are coming at us fast and furious at this point. And so what we're doing at each stage of that, especially in authentication, is we're really pushing for passwordless, right? We have phishing resistant technologies, right, with our FastPass, which you can log in with biometrics, right? And it's AA3. And so it's, we're going through all that now of how to do that in the government, because that can be difficult, right? But we have CAT cards that we help with as well. And then again, where they're hitting is in that authentication piece. It's really what's happening, as Jim mentioned, he's talking about 0-day, but really for us in identity, it's the social engineering aspect and in the cyber supply chain attacks that are really the ones that are the highest critical elements in what's happening in the identity space. It's the credential stuffing that we've seen that's being very successful. Obviously, the phishing attacks are very successful, and really the social engineering piece of really that authentication piece that's happening are being very successful, which we saw in the MGM attack. So I think, like you said, identity is the front door to let in, but we do have capabilities that we're building in with partners like Palo Alto, so we can see the entire enterprise, right? Not just the identity piece, which again, Okta does a great job of having the capabilities to lock that front door and open it when it needs to be open. So, right, the right technology at the right time for the right place for the right people. And then we have, again, the shared signals that we talked about earlier with our Palo Alto partners.
All right, Christine, I got to jump in here because this is really important. It's been 9 years since Michael Daniel, the then National Cyber Director, said, we're going to kill the password dead. You seem to be saying we're closer now than we have ever been pushing for passwordless. We know the authentication. Are we going to kill it dead?
So I would say we're on our path, right? We're on the way to do that. It is there. It is happening. I think the world will be a better place and more secure when we do that fully. We do have hurdles to overcome, but we are making strides, right? Every day we're chipping away at that here at Okta as we go. And listen, I love my FastPass, right? I log in, I just touch, do a little biometric touch on my computer and I'm logged into all my applications. And then, if the applications, if I time out, it's a quick just, again, finger on the keyboard and I'm back in. And so, and having that dashboard that gives me all my applications is fantastic as well, which is, to go back a little bit to Okta on the dashboard, talking to our, DoD customers, when you have 200 applications that you're accessing on a daily basis, right? When I was in government and I had to access all my applications and logging in and logging out, and how do I get in there? And all of a sudden I'm in one for 10 minutes and then I have to go over to another one and then I get logged out of the other one. Now I got to remember my password for that system to come back, and I can't have the same password, right? Passwordless and FastPass is the way to go for that.
Jason, let me just jump in because a lot of what you talked about was kind of at the beginning side and hitting identity from that. But as Zero Trust has evolved, a lot more of it is about that continuous authorization. And a lot of the integrations come in at that point. So not only from an identity standpoint, but from a content, from an application, from all of the different pillars, and the integration then to be able to go back to a tool like Okta on the identity side and make sure if you have privilege escalation, or if you've got data that's being exfiltrated to a place it shouldn't go. That's where this key to all these different kind of telemetry you're gathering from all the tools and the integration then to go back into Okta and not only take off the user or lock the account locally, but again, to your question earlier, reach all the way back into their cloud capabilities if they have things going on at AWS or Azure or someplace else. Be able to automatically go and shut those down, because it has to happen at the speed of machines. You don't want, if you know you have some kind of a breach, you've got multiple things that are coming in and telling you that, a new login or an unfamiliar place, or you've got some kind of an anomaly that's coming in from how a user normally behaves. Lock that down and lock them down across the entire ecosystem of where they're using different resources.
Yeah, all great points. And that's where our identity threat protection comes in. And that's where the integration's happening on that continuous monitoring, right? We've seen gaps in that continuous risk monitoring after that initial authentication, as Jim mentioned. We've seen fragmented risk insights across the diverse security tools and systems. And then we have to balance the risk mitigation with the user experience, right? To make sure that the user experience is what the user's expecting and it's frictionless. And then the decentralized and highly manual threat detection response is what we're trying to solve with our identity threat protection and these shared signals. So, taking across the 5 pillars, if something happens at an endpoint, Palo's telling us about it. And if it looks strange, right, and there's an incident on identity too, we can take those shared threat signals and do either a universal logout or make them re-authenticate in, right? There's different things that you can do on the platform as it all comes into the identity threat protection. It gives you a lot of power there. And then we can automate some of that with our workflows. So to that point, it's that continuous monitoring and being able to take automated actions while you're giving the time for the SOC to do the research they need to do in order to figure out if it's a real threat or not.
Christine and Jim, you both brought up this idea of sharing information. Jim, you mentioned the data that comes from the cyber tools. Let's talk through that a little bit. I think that's a key piece, and it goes back to the beginning of what Christine said about tool integration, right? If the identity piece picks up something, they pass it to a bigger capability that can then delve deeper into it. When you talk to your clients and you talk to your federal customers, why is that more important to them today, that this shared threat intelligence? We know the threats are coming faster, the volume, the velocity, the veracity of it are all continue to rise. But what about the shared threat intelligence that is changing today that maybe we haven't seen in the past, and why things are more important today?
Yeah, I mean, I think anytime that you have some kind of an artificial intelligence or data science issue, the more data you have, the better off you are, and the more sources of that data, being able to normalize it and stitch it together. A lot of the conversations I'm having with DoD leadership now are focused on outcomes, which is really refreshing, because sometimes you get lost in this, let's talk about product. But I'm an operations guy at heart. I mean, that's where I came up in the business. And the days of sitting with a guy watching for alerts and trying to manually kind of figure out which ones were correlated and what was important. Right now, it's a needle in the haystack, right? Just look at Palo Alto Networks. We're not that large of a business in terms of some of our enterprises we deal with. But we went from seeing about 1 billion log events a day at our SOC to now we're seeing 59 billion. So over a course of 4 years, that's the exponential growth in the amount of data that's coming through. That's our operations center. It's indicative of what's happening across the entire space. Certainly the DoD is a very target-rich environment. We manage for the DoD. They use one of our tools for their attack surface. So they have over 300 million assets that are externally visible. So that's, again, these numbers start to get pretty scary. You can't deal with that sheer amount of volume without having artificial intelligence, having automation, and having a multitude of tools that are supplying very rich data. A lot of times an alert that comes through our SIM tool would have on average over 150 different alerts that are associated. Those can come from over a dozen different tools, anything from cloud to the 5 pillars. This information has to be normalized. It has to be stitched together. It has to be presented in a way that you can automate it. You can have some manual processes, workflows that make sense, and machine speeds. You can take action on things that are critical and need to be used. Having that kind of capability, it's the only way to run an efficient SOC. And again, this outcome-based of really how we're addressing cybersecurity now, there's only 2 measurements that matter. It's the mean time to detect and the mean time to respond. One of the things that has been really, really scary over the last year and a half, I would say, is the collapse of time you have from when somebody first comes into the network and when they've exfiltrated data or they've done what they wanted to. That used to take weeks. That has gone down to days. And over this year, because they're using artificial intelligence, they're using more sophisticated attacks, that exfiltration is happening in a matter of hours. That's the window you have to do the mean time to detect and the mean time to respond. If you can't catch what's happening within that time frame, then you have a whole different issue that you're dealing with. What do I do after the fact? And that's not a place any of us want to be. So that outcome based decisions and having all that data stitched together from this wide variety of tools, that's what gives you those outcomes, and it gives you the ability to find the needle in the haystack that is really critical, important information that has to be acted on immediately.
Yeah, and here at Okta, we're seeing the same exact thing, and we're calling it the cyber mesh, right? You have to kind of put a cyber mesh around it and interconnect it all. As going back to the first question, right, of how you have to have providers and that are interoperable to each other, right, and working together on their products, right, to make sure that their products are sharing these threat signals. And I think, to Jim's point on the time, whether to, gain access to across your network and start moving horizontally across or exfil data, right? That's why we have this universal logout, right? That's why we're working towards those, because we're seeing these threats come and we're building that into our capabilities here for the identity world. Again, identity here at Okta, right? That's what we want to do. We want to stop it before it can move horizontally, while the SOC, as Jim pointed out, is doing the work they need to do through all this threat signals they're receiving, right? Through Palo and the capabilities that they have to make a decision on, okay, maybe we were wrong in university logging them out, but that was safer than letting them continue to go through and see. So that is, a key component of our identity threat protection. And I think, to Jim's point, especially working with the DoD and even the IC, right, and our federal customers, intelligence is driven operations, right? And now we're getting intelligence driving outcomes, right, in the cybersecurity world, which is where it should be, and that's how they're used to operating. So now, it fits right into their culture. It's not against the grain. It's how they operate, how they make decisions, and really keying in and getting rid of the white noise in that intelligence is really what we're trying to do, to make sure that they can pinpoint the threats a lot quicker and take action on it. And so I think that's where it's important in, the continuous risk evaluation, the shared signals pipeline, and even the continuous policy evaluations going on that you can do between our two platforms to make sure that everything is consistent and that you're actually getting the real threats and intelligence that you can take action on. Right. And being a former Gubby, right, who worked on intelligence and intelligence, first of all, being a 9/11 first responder and then having to, build a whole intelligence agency at the FBI and do that, and how we changed and seeing how intelligence was leading our, operations there. This is the same thing. This is now intelligence leading the outcomes, as Jim mentioned, in the cybersecurity world. And it's a change that I'm so happy that they're making, and we're here to support that with the capabilities that we're providing.
You've both have brought up this idea of the volume of attacks, the sophistication of attacks, and we've heard the mention of artificial intelligence quite a bit. Jim, I think you mentioned on the front end, hey, the attackers are using AI. So let's talk about the defenders and how the defenders can start applying certain AI tools and other kind of advanced capabilities to deal with those AI attacks. One of the things I think that is concerning is, what we've heard time and again around cybersecurity is the defenders have to be right all the time. The attackers only have to be right once. Walk me through where AI is starting to play a bigger role in that defense. And we know why it's important just because of the volume of the data. But do you feel like AI is there? Is it ready to play enough defense, or are we still testing it? Give me a sense so folks can have confidence in those tools.
Sure. Yeah. So, AI means a lot of things. It's a big umbrella. Technically, we at Palo Alto Networks, we've been doing AI for over a decade, right? I mean, a lot of what goes into advanced threat detection, pattern recognition, behavior, once you're doing packet inspection, that all has been around for a long time. It's a lot of that's based on machine learning. What we've seen really start to accelerate in the last few years is use by our customers of additional artificial intelligence, whether that's large learning models or large language models or generative AI. We're using some of that internally, right? We're trying to figure out how do you make, look at the DoD. Oftentimes we have operators that are relatively inexperienced and they may move in and out of those roles pretty quickly. How do you make the tools as effective as possible? You allow them to ask questions of the tool on how to do things. You give them co-pilots, you give them best practices. You really put at their fingertips artificial intelligence, whether that's making recommendations, whether it is identifying alerts that are known type of problems based on the experience that we have, whether it's using machine learning to identify assets on the network, whether it's doing kind of baselines for behavior, whether that's an application, a device, a user. You want to be able to have that baseline so you can determine when you have anomalies. All of these things are certainly being used already. I like to say that artificial intelligence is not something you go and buy. It's part of every single tool in the toolkit. And the better those work, and as we've said throughout this entire discussion, the better those integrate and share that information with each other, the more powerful AI is, and the better it will work in the long run. If you have all of these tools, the 5 pillars deployed, you have the 6th pillar from the DoD perspective being automation and integration, and that 7th pillar being visibility and analytics. If all of those are working together, you have this funnel at the bottom at the operations side that is collecting this data. It has very sophisticated tools that are already taking advantage of the AI built into everything upstream. And then you're doing the stitching and correlating at that operations level to find the needle in the haystack, find the things that are truly important. AI, it's always about taking the signal out of the noise, and there's a lot of noise out there, and you don't want to be chasing noise. You need your people that are running your SOC, the people that are really the tip of the spear. They need to be focused on really important things that take real intelligence, not artificial intelligence. Let the AI and the automation take the things that are repetitive, redundant, simple, repeatable. And the tools really have a lot of that built into them today. We're being very, very sophisticated. We're being much more successful than we used to. At Palo Alto Networks, our SOC, we automate well over 90% of all of the alerts that come through. And that's allowed us to really change the paradigm of what a SOC looks like, and let your really talented people focus on things that are really critical and important.
And to add on to what Jim said, right, he's talked about really meaningfully increasing security, maximizing that efficiency. And I think the one to add on from an identity perspective is improving the user experience, which Jim talked about from a kind of IT operator perspective. For us, it's improving the user experience more from the user of the systems and the applications, right? And so really providing, guarding, we're using AI to really guard against credential-based attacks, right? That adaptive multi-factor authentication, that kind of upping your MFA game again into that auth-n method. Really, at the end of the day, what we talked about with identity threat protection already, I've kind of beat that drum, but that has our AI built into it. And really what we're seeing is, especially in identity, there's so many policies out there around identity. And especially when you're trying now, what we're seeing is more organizations, especially in the DoD, trying to do this federated model, right? Which is really the way to go if you're going to do best practice for identity. But there's different policies out there that will impact that federated model. So how do we recommend policies, right, with AI into your identity stack? And then the governance around it. And I think when you're taking all of that, it feeds into what Jim talked about and how the SOC's going to respond, the way they're going to respond, what they're going to do, and all the threat intelligence that they're going to get with AI. And I think that the key part about it is what Jim and I just talked about. After I retired from government after 23 years, I did go to AWS for a little stint, and I was a strategic AI executive. And I think what's important to realize about AI is, again, there's no easy button for it. And so really with AI, you have to start with really small use cases and you build upon those use cases. And that's what you're seeing here with Okta and Palo and how we're working together is there are use cases and we're proving the use case out, and then we're expanding and iterating on that use case to make it better every time we do it and stronger every time we do it, especially with, allowing that integration to happen and sharing, again, the threat intelligence and signals to make sure that the models are operating the way they should. So I think that's key here is small use cases and build upon those and looking at that instead of trying to take on the whole world right away.
And let me just double click into something that Christine said, because I think it really is critical. That user experience, it goes across everything we do. I mean, a lot of things we do on the network side, having inline AI, the speed at which you're able to do everything at one time, the platform itself, you're not doing multiple passes through multiple tools. And what we do from a zero trust network access perspective to gain efficiencies in terms of where you're going around the network consistently, irregardless of where you're coming from and what tools, you've got a consistent stack. And we've seen real time when we've deployed these tools within the DoD, sometimes over 20x improvement in user experience. I mean, I can make anything secure, but you won't be able to use it anymore. And that's such a critical piece, because if you impact that user experience too significantly, your users start trying to find a way around your security tools. And that's not what anything wants. So the best case scenario, which is what we've seen within some of our DoD deployments around zero trust and specifically zero trust network access, is they've said this works better than it did before I turned it on, right? Not only am I more secure, but my user experience is so much vastly better than it was. Don't take this away from me. And there's no better thing than hearing that from customers that we didn't break it when we secured it.
Yeah, and you have to remember all the points that Jim just mentioned are so essential in an operational environment, right? At the end of the day, there's a mission that DoD is trying to achieve every single day by keeping us safe. And if you make any of this very difficult for them to do, right, lives are on the line at the end of the day. And so I think, as much as we can as people supporting the DoD and partnering with them as well and providing these services, we want to make it as frictionless and as seamless as possible so that they can worry about the mission, not worry about, right, all the other pieces that come along with that.
Jim, Christine, we're just about out of time. Before I let you go, I'm going to give you each maybe 30 seconds, a minute if you can, and just where it's coming next with Zero Trust. What's that journey? We know that there's deadlines coming up for the civilian agencies that many of them probably didn't make that September 30th deadline, but we know OMB is still going to shake their fists at them, say, come on, move it forward, keep going. And we know DoD has until 2027 to meet their deadlines. What do you see over the next year, some of the focus areas around Zero Trust? Christine, lead us off.
Yeah, so from an Okta perspective, when Zero Trust first came up, right, in identity, everybody was talking about MFA and SSO, MFA, SSO, MFA, SSO, right? For now, our customers now, and including Okta's platform, we've moved beyond MFA and SSO, right, to provide this entire continuous life cycle of the identity. And again, having those integrations with our partners to get those threat signals and to integrate together to provide a technical stack that works together very seamlessly out of the box. And I think that what has to happen is the organizations, as they're maturing through their zero trust journey, they can't just check the box and say, I have MFA and SSO and I'm good in identity, right? They have to continue to move throughout the process and mature their identity stack, because it really is that critical component, again, that front door in to everything else. And they have to make sure that that front door is secured and that the key is given to the right people to open the door when they need it to get the access to the right thing. So that is where Okta's seeing, the organizations start to move, but there's some organizations still that are like, well, we have MFA and SSO, so we're good. And that's really not the case in this threat environment that we've talked about a lot here during our discussion today. So beyond MFA, let's go beyond MFA and let's get that identity threat protection in, that continuous monitoring in, right? Adaptive MFA, that, again, Jason, your point, passwordless, let's go. We're here to support in any way possible and get to work with great partners like Jim.
And kill that password dead. There you go. Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, I mean, I think DoD is not any different. They would certainly like to be further along than they are right now. I'll just focus on one area that we've talked about a lot here, and that's around integration. Pillar 6 from the DoD Zero Trust strategy is all around automation and integration. And most of the customers I've talked to that have gotten a little bit further down the path, the one thing they have said every time is, I wish I'd started earlier with automation and orchestration as part of my zero trust journey, tying all of these different tools together, having something that can stitch that data, make sure the telemetry that I have is not just falling on the floor or sitting somewhere that it never gets looked at. That automation orchestration is a great area to be investing in, and it's an investment that will never go away. It continues to pay dividends. You're going to continue to accelerate, I think, where you're at from a zero trust journey. The tools we have, our XOR tool has over 1,000 integrations with other tools right out of the box. These can be combined, they can be customized. You can create brand new ones. But again, I think that integration piece is really, really critical. And it's a place that we're seeing a tremendous amount of investment.
Jim, Christine, I really appreciate our conversation. Unfortunately, we are out of time for this session of the Cyber Leaders Exchange. So let me thank my guest. Christine Halverson is the Public Sector Chief Technology Officer at Okta. Christine, always a pleasure to catch up. Jim Smith is the DoD and Intel Field CTO for Palo Alto Networks. Jim, always a pleasure as well.
Great to see you again, Jason. Thanks, Christine.
Thanks, Jason. Thanks, Jim.
I'm Jason Miller, and you're watching Federal News Network. Now let me send you back to the studio for more on the Cyber Leaders Exchange.